Yeah, there's sideburns this time, yeah. No, I don't know what to make of it either. So I was hoping that maybe you had some ideas, or you might know someone who had some ideas. Or... Oh, you do? Okay, awesome, yeah. No, that's not a problem. I used to work in retail. I'm used to handling grumpy people. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, all right, so where do I find him? Uh-huh. And how exactly do I get to Sesame Street? In 1933, Caroll Edwin Spinney was born in Waltham, Massachusetts. He was the youngest of three children, and his mother, who had been born in Bolton, England, named him Caroll because he was born on December 26th, the day after Christmas. Young Caroll loved drawing and painting, and after seeing a performance of Three Little Kittens at the age of 5, he became enchanted with the art of puppetry. 3 years later, he bought his first puppet, a monkey, from a rummage sale, and a year later his mother would buy him a Punch and Judy puppet theater. Throughout his childhood and teenage years, Spinney would put on puppet shows and work on the art of puppeteering. After graduating from Acton High School, he would spend 4 years in the United States Air Force. While in the Air Force, he would work on his cartooning, producing a gag strip entitled Harvey that was all about the humor of military life. Spinney would serve 4 years in the Air Force and then return to Massachusetts, where he began working in local television, puppeteering for a children's program, and also employing his art skills to create a series of short, black and white cartoons called Crazy Crayon.
Crazy Crayon! Hold it! We've got pictures to draw. Crazy Crayon. Oh, you silly crayon. We've got a story to tell.
Working as a children's entertainer kept Spinney moving. He would head west to Las Vegas in 1955 to take on a role in the show Rascal Rabbit. And in 1958, he would move back to Boston to take a job puppeteering for the Judy and Goggles show. Throughout the 1960s, Spinney would be often seen but seldom recognized as a costume character actor on Boston's local production of Bozo's Big Top, where one of his characters, Mr. Lion, became known for making drawings for the children who participated in the filming of the show. During this period, he would also create 2 cat puppet characters, Pickle Puss and Pop, whom he would use in many of his own productions and later in direct-to-video productions for the Muppets. In 1962, Spinney was attending a puppeteering festival when he was approached by a puppeteer named Jim Henson. Henson would ask Spinney if they could get together sometime during the conference and talk about the Muppets. But Spinney, not realizing that Henson was actually offering him a job, didn't manage to find time for the conversation. Henson, however, never forgot about the promise he saw in Spinney's work. 7 years later, at the Puppeteers of America Festival, Henson would approach him again. This time, Spinney had just bombed spectacularly at an attempted performance when technical difficulties had ruined his animated backgrounds. Spinney recalled that Henson approached him and said, "I liked what you were trying to do," before once again asking if they could talk about the Muppets. Shortly after the convention, Spinney would join Henson as a full-time Muppeteer. One of Spinney's first jobs as a Muppeteer was performing in the inaugural season of Sesame Street. Henson had not been involved in the initial development of the program, but was brought on after talking with producer Joan Gans Cooney. Henson had been recommended to her by John Stone, her fellow producer, who had previously worked on Captain Kangaroo. Henson didn't receive his usual puppeteering fee for the show, instead opting for a contract that gave him ownership of the original characters he would create for it, and also a share of any money made from merchandising those characters. Spinney did get paid for his work, but in the first season he felt that the pay was not in line with the massive amount of effort it took to provide so many voices while operating multiple complex puppets. He considered leaving the show at the end of the first season, but the builder who created Big Bird, Kermit Love, yes, his actual name was Kermit Love, convinced him it was worth sticking around. The decision to stay wound up being great for Spinney on many levels, as he went on to spend the next 49 years working on the show. The popularity of the characters gave him the opportunity to write and cartoon about them, as well as performing them, and he would travel the world to perform his characters live in prestigious venues, including appearing with the Boston Pops and making multiple visits to the White House. While many of Spinney's fans would never see the performer's face, his name became legendary among puppeteers, and his full-body puppet work, like his performance as Big Bird, is still studied and emulated by puppeteers the world over. In his memoirs, Spinney would say that his earlier work in children's television had never given him a real sense of purpose in his life, but that Sesame Street made him feel like he was making a difference. In 2015, just a year after recording a documentary about his work with Sesame Street, Spinney retired from puppeteering his characters. According to Sesame Workshop, Spinney had just received a diagnosis of dystonia, a neurological disorder that can cause sustained muscle spasms and tremors. For the next 4 years, Spinney would not be operating the puppets for the characters he played, but he would still be providing their voices. He recorded his final lines as Oscar the Grouch and Big Bird in 2018 and entered full retirement, with the role of Big Bird being turned over to Matt Vogel and Eric Jacobson taking over the role of Oscar. On November 8th of 2019, Matt Vogel would portray Big Bird at a lighting ceremony in New York City, where by mayoral proclamation, the day was named Caroll Spinney Day. December 8th of that year, Spinney passed away peacefully at his home in Woodstock, Connecticut.
But may I be the first to wish you a very merry...
Hey, don't say it! There's only one merry thing about Christmas.
And what might that be?
It only comes once a year. And this year I plan to sleep through the whole thing. Fruitcake and all.
In 1966, veteran WGBH producer Joan Gans Cooney and Lloyd Morissette, the vice president of the Carnegie Foundation, started discussing ideas for how they could master the addictive qualities of television and do something good with them. The discussions would result 2 years later in the founding of the Children's Television Workshop, with a combined startup grant of $8 million from the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the U.S. federal government. They were working on what would become Sesame Street, setting up a format that included comedy, music, and fast-moving action. For the first 19 seasons, the producers would focus on individual vignettes to match a younger, short attention span. But in season 20, they would begin moving into episode-long story arcs, as research showed that young children were, in fact, capable of following an hour-long story. That kind of research has always been a major part of Sesame Street, even since before its premiere. The Children's Television Workshop, which would later rebrand as the Sesame Workshop, kept close contact with child psychologists, taking their advice on anything and everything to do with the format, the characters, and individual story arcs. Joan Gans Cooney was named the Children's Television Workshop's first executive director shortly after it was founded, making her one of the first female executives in American television. Taking advice from the producers she assembled to work on the show, almost all of them having previously worked on the show Captain Kangaroo, it would be recommended to her that she reach out to Jim Henson, who was apparently so at the forefront of their consideration that producer John Stone said that if Henson wouldn't agree to be a part of the show, they should make do without the puppets. Apparently there was no second choice. Either they had Henson Muppets, or they would have no puppets at all. Henson was reluctant at first, but ultimately agreed because the goals of the Children's Television Workshop were in line with his own, using entertainment and humor to make a positive change in the world. Initially, the Muppet characters were supposed to be a smaller part of the show, but testing with children showed that they loved the Muppet characters most of all the content produced, and over the first few years, Henson's characters would have a consistently increasing role in the show. Similarly, when it was shown that children were more interested in listening to other children on the screen than in listening to the adults, more children would be added to the cast and invited to participate in sketches with the Muppet characters. Today, Sesame Street is largely funded via private corporations, such as through their deal with HBO that grants the cable network the premiere of each episode, but the free education value of Sesame Street is served by the episodes being freed for broadcast on PBS 2 weeks later. It's a controversial contract, but it is, according to Sesame Workshop, one that has allowed them to maintain the high standards of the show without having to reduce the number and length of episodes in a season. Similarly, their lucrative toy licensing deals have helped them to keep production values high, although at times it has caused controversy over commercialization of children's education. Sesame Street has also moved into the international market, with localized versions airing all over the world. One of my personal favorites being the UK's Furchester Hotel.
Everything's fine, I'm fine.
And when Warner Brothers launched their HBO Max service, one of their first originals was Sesame Street's Elmo hosting the Not Too Late show.
Mr. Grouch, sir! Scaredy Pants delivery at your service!
What?
Ah! Oh! Sorry, sir! Here you go, your next delivery.
What is that?
Ghostagram number 2. It appears to be a jack-in-the-box, sir.
1978's Christmas Eve on Sesame Street was the first Christmas special produced from the show. The same year, CBS would borrow 3 of the Sesame Street Muppet characters and 3 of their human cast members for a special Sesame Street Christmas, a more traditional style of Christmas special with celebrity guests performing Christmas songs and routines. It would be nominated for an Emmy Award for Outstanding Children's Program, but it would lose to Christmas Eve on Sesame Street, which remains the most popular Sesame Street special of 1978, as odd a sentence as that is to say. In November of 2006, a Sesame Street Christmas Carol was released direct to DVD. Narrated by Tim Curry and filmed at Sesame Street's usual location of Kaufman Astoria Studios in Astoria, Queens, it uses the core structure of A Christmas Carol, that is, a miserly coot being shown the past, present, and future, to act as a sort of best of for Sesame Street Christmas segments. Let's get this out of the way up front. This adaptation is so different from the source material that I'm awarding no points for any of our categories.
So you get nothing!
Technically, I could give points for Marlene not having any ghostly companions, or I could give points for the Ghost of Christmas Present not having the children Want and Ignorance accompany her. But there's no value in that, because this version of A Christmas Carol is more about the gag that Oscar the Grouch is Scrooge, and to that end, Oscar is a completely unrepentant Scrooge. We don't end the show with him having some grand revelation that he must change his ways. And that's perfectly fine, because Oscar isn't a net negative for his community. He does, in fact, have friends, after his fashion. He does see to other people being taken care of, after his fashion. He just has a different way of looking at the world. And that's part of the genius both of casting Oscar as the Scrooge in this special and of the character of Oscar the Grouch in general. Oscar is grouchy. He likes garbage, and he likes things that make people, including himself, miserable. But that doesn't stop him from having friends. It just makes him not as demonstrative a friend. He may be rude, and his sense of humor may be a little mean, but overall, he's benign. Oscar could very easily be a Goofus and Gallant character where he's constantly used as the example of how not to act. But instead, Sesame Street occasionally remonstrates the character for going too far, but for the most part, accepts him as he is. Some people are grumpy. Some people are loud and try to keep people away from their front door. Some people love things that nobody else loves, and that's okay. Being a grouch isn't bad in and of itself. It's whether or not you cause any harm by being a grouch. There's something revolutionary to a children's character who can have what we typically think of as a negative, in this case a bad general attitude, and not make him the negative example. Instead, we can acknowledge that he is who he is, and he's as much a part of our community as anyone else. What matters ultimately is whether he's willing to stand with his community when it needs him. Aside from that, he's a grouch. And being grumpy and unpleasant makes him not a bad person, but rather a very good grouch. The special is primarily based off of archival material, including a retelling of The Gift of the Magi with Bert, Ernie, and Mr. Hooper. In between, Caroll Spinney plays a grumpy Oscar, reluctantly accepting packages sent to him containing the spirits of Christmas past, present, and future, all three of whom are computer animated. The effect is a little jarring, but it probably kept the budget for the special low because it didn't require additional puppets to be made or operated. And one of the spirits is voiced by Kristen Chenoweth, who is kind of a Muppet herself. A sexy, pocket-sized Muppet with a very respectable Broadway career. I'm sorry, what was I saying? Oh, yes. What do you think of Caroll Spinney's take as Oscar the Grouch acting as the Scrooge in A Sesame Street Christmas Carol, one of the goofier, friendlier takes on A Christmas Carol we've had on the list? Drop down into the comments below and let me know. While you're down there in the comments, make sure you give that like and subscribe button some love if you haven't already. There's also a share button that you can use to share this video with your friends, because after all, sharing is caring. If you're looking for more of the film Optimist, you can start the Scrooge Advent Calendar from the very beginning over here. And up here, we have the Halloween countdown I did of Dracula's. Until next time, watch like it means something.
Kristen Chenoweth want Funyun? Crunchy like chip, fun like onion.
Not really.
Funyun!